Yeah.
So I have a question. So as the the environment shifts, do you believe that like as well, like the language will also develop in a way where your grounding would be like changed?
I would guess it would be, because I think that the birds, I'm not sure of this, but looking at what others have reported, at one time of year where we go, we hear the birds a lot. At other times, the birds are there. We can hear alarm calls. We can see them. We know they're there.
Hiding.
But they're raising their young. And so they don't want to have their young exposed to the hawks and ravens that are in the area. So they're really quiet. And I think that before, while they're trying to attract mates, or females are trying to choose mates, it's complicated. It's just males showing off, females choosing. There's got to be a back and forth, just like with humans. That there are some things that are of interest, and they'll focus on those. And then once they've paired up, then they're worried about other things, keeping intruders out of their territory so that they can keep the resources from the territory. And they'll be much more concerned with intruders than they are with attracting or getting others sexually aroused. And then later, when they're raising the kids, there are yet other concerns. And I would imagine that there are going to be something like that. Now, that said, I don't think, let me go back to this. I think it's very implausible that this means food, this means raven, this means hawk, this means something else. We know that they have, many species have different vocalizations for a ground predator or an aerial predator, and presumably other predators as well. They do have some tie-in, but almost certainly the AAABACAD isn't the equivalent of saying there's ice cream over in the corner there. It's going to be much worse than that in trying to assign the meaning to the language. Mm-hmm. But they have to have some of these species. Well, the black-headed grosbeak that this goes down to Mexico during the wintertime, and then back up into this area in the Sierras during the summertime and spring. That's where they are now. So they're going to be focusing on different things. Yeah. But what and how do they relate to it? I would guess that if they're doing things like feeding and warning about predators, they have a much less rich vocabulary. If they're trying to show off for mating, then they probably have a richer vocabulary. But there have been many attempts with things like mockingbirds to ask, do the males with a richer vocabulary or a more complex syntax, are they better at attracting females? The answer is no. And so
maybe they move their feathers.
Maybe it's a male-male thing. They seem to have, age enters in. That the males that are older seem to have a larger vocabulary.
That makes sense.
But we think that some of at the beginning of the season, the vocabulary isn't quite as rich as it is later in the season. Mm-hmm.
It's much more complex than you would think, right? I mean, as I'm learning about it from you, I'm amazed at how complex it is.
You think like a bird, humans can be pretty complex.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to think a bird in its environment isn't thinking just the same complex thoughts that we are.
And that's probably the most interesting thing that I've gained from working with Professor Taylor is just thinking to myself, God, it's incredible that we take birds for granted, we don't listen to them, we edit them out of our environment, but actually they are involved in a very complex language, territorialisms, talking about things, moving. How are they relating to us? We don't even know. We're just moving through space with our iPhones, totally disconnected.
And their environment, just to build on that one thing, These same birds, black-headed grosbeak, will be living in one corner of the yard, and then he'll go down during the wintertime to Acapulco, and then he'll come back to exactly the same corner of the yard here.
Exactly the same.
Exactly the same corner of the yard.
Amazing.
They have to have a lot of
Amazing.
intelligence for that.
And yeah, with another species, like with ravens, like University of Washington doing this study on their cognition, and they seem to remember people actually, or by
Absolutely.
Yes. Oh,
how
God,
much
yeah.
they're young, and
But if you dress up differently, then they won't recognize you,
Interesting.
even though you behave similarly. I was thinking that and sort of anticipating what Victoria would be asking about, how humans relate to birds. You know, with ravens, it's thought that the ravens will guide wolves and humans to where caribou are and moose, so that we can kill them and they'll get some food. So
They're actually
so the
leading us.
traditional Indians would follow the ravens, and certainly wolves appear to follow the ravens. And one consideration I hadn't given until I read, this wasn't Washington, this is, yeah, it was Washington, from Marsloff's work, where he pointed out that crows and ravens, who were very smart, had this smart long before humans did. And when the humans evolved, they were smarter than we were, than say the chimps. And so you would think then that we would develop a special relationship with them. And indeed, if you look at throughout the northwestern area and throughout most of the world, in fact, they revere and worship ravens. And the ravens are often what are the source of the world. One of them that I just saw, it's a wonderful carving in the Natural History Museum in Chicago, where there's a raven opening a clamshell, and out come the humans that populate the earth from the clamshell. But it was a raven that opened it up for us.
Okay, one last question.
Yeah.
Only one more question.
Well, I mean, we could go all day,
Okay.
No, I have to decide.
Do
Okay.
two, Paul.
but do two then.
All right.
And I'll try to repeat,
The
okay?
first one, how do you respond to, well, not that, but brain size? How does that relate to like their expected intelligence?
I actually love that question. So how does brain size relate to intelligence? In other words, you have a very small bird brain to human brain. Women have a smaller brain than a male brain. How do we relate size of brain to intelligence?
The thinking is that it has more to do with the structure than with the size. And the HCF area, I'm not sure the area, but it's like that, is involved with producing language. And the birds that have more complex languages seem to have that area develop more. Probably you've heard of the Fox F2 gene, and in fact, the Fox F2 gene is highly active in humans and in birds, but not other species. And that gene is almost certainly an important part of linguistic ability. People have studied it. I don't know the exact state of the understanding, but certainly there's something there, and likewise with structure. Yeah.
One more question, and then I'll ask the last one.
The last question is might be more personal, but so how would you define consciousness?
So the last question from the class is how you define consciousness.
I don't think at this point there's a lot gained by trying to define it too carefully. I think the big issue for me, the thing of interest, is are the subjective sensations we have. And are my subjective sensations the same as yours? How do I know? Is my sensation of red the same as your sensation of red? I really don't know. And like in a machine, can we say that we have achieved consciousness in a machine? The classic answer posed by Alan Turing is, as I described earlier, if I can't tell who is answering, if I pose a question to a person in a machine behind a curtain, if I can't tell who's answering, then he would say, you have to say that that thing has mind. This could be, but in that case, I would say mind and consciousness needn't be the same. But for me, the interesting thing is this subjective experience. That's what I would like to get at. And I think at this stage, we're like people before Newton. They had the refined notion of a machine, like from Archimedes. They could make very elaborate war machines. But the idea that one body could act on another body from a distance was impossible. Any of Archimedes' machines, like a lever or an inclined plane or pushing, required acting on it. But here, for the first time, there was not just gravity, but there was electromagnetic attraction. Mm-hmm. These were just unthinkable prior to Newton. Mm-hmm. And my take of it is that the consciousness is just unthinkable with our current science. Explaining it's unthinkable with our current science. But as we push harder, and then I think we may be able to do it. And before Newton, trying to be too precise in our definition of electromagnetism or gravity, or even the weak force, heavy force, those would be, it just wouldn't make sense. And I think that's the same thing with consciousness now. We'll find that there are different types of consciousness, I would imagine, I don't know. But right now we don't even know how to measure it. We don't know how to tell if we've achieved it or not. But that doesn't mean we won't ever be able to do it. That's my take.
As an artist, I'm very inspired by my walks with you, by the sounds, the visualizations. It makes me think differently. It makes me experience reality differently. How is it important to you to talk or work with artists like myself? How do you see artists participating in the scientific process today, in this point of human history? Just a short answer for you personally, maybe.
I think that there are some parts of reality that artists can do a really good job with, better than molecular biologists, arts reductionists, molecular biologists, or many physicists. Holistic things are an example, like your work with we are all the water connected throughout the world. That that doesn't you can't write an equation for that, but yet it's certainly true that we're all interconnected in some way through the water, and we're connected to nature through the water, and the water is connected to other water in a complex way that is not amenable to equations, and so that appeals to me. There are other types of art that perhaps don't relate so directly, but I find that one example. But there are others as well.
Well, I'm hoping that we can do that with birds.
So am I.
So thank you for including me in this project. And everybody, big applause to And I know there's 5 million more questions, are you okay to
Sure,
answering emails,
sure.
or you can send me and
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right. Thanks,
no
you
hurry.
guys.